How are you guys? Welcome to Comic Kong, and today we're going to look at the iconic Marvel superhero, Spider-Man. Canon Group bought the rights for Spider-Man in the 1980s so they could make their own Spider-Man film. They had no idea who Spider-Man was, and they wanted to make a story where the main character gets turned into a gigantic spider after a failed experiment with a mad scientist called Dr. Zork. Okay, would it have been good? No, but would it have been entertaining? No, of course not. It sounds terrible. What are you talking about? And that is the first of 100 facts about Spider-Man. Let's dive in. Spider-Man debuted in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in 1962. Spider-Man's real name is Peter Parker. Stan Lee always gave his characters the same letter for the first and surname. He did this because he had such a bad memory that if he remembered what one of the names was called, he could guess what the other name was. This didn't always work out. In Amazing Spider-Man number 1, the main character is called Peter Palmer.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Ditko was the artist, Stan Lee wrote the dialogue. However, according to Stan Lee, Steve Ditko would do at least 50% and sometimes up to 99% of the work. For example, Stan Lee once said, "Let's make Spider-Man fight a guy made of sand." That's it. That's all he did. Steve Ditko did everything else. All the art, all the dialogue. Sadly, he never gets enough credit. Most people didn't even notice that he died in 2018. Spider-Man gained his powers after being bitten by an irradiated spider. In most movies and animated shows, he was bitten by a genetically altered spider. Spider-Man has super strength, stamina, healing, and durability. He has incredibly thick, sticky hairs on the palms of his hands and feet, which allows him to effortlessly stick to walls. These hairs pierce the spider suit so he can stick to walls while wearing his costume. His most important power is his spider sense, which allows him to instinctively tell when he's in danger. Everybody but Stan Lee thought Spider-Man would fail. The Marvel bosses said it would never work because people don't like spiders. The other writers thought it was silly to have a teenage superhero because teenagers read comics so they can forget about their teenage life. Stan Lee thought the character would be a success because the readers can empathize with a superhero who had the same problems as them, like money, school, bullying, tentacle doctors, and relationships. After obtaining his powers, he built twin web shooters. The devices worn on his wrists can shoot strands of web fluid at high pressure. They are extremely sticky, but durable enough to lift several tons. He wears a utility belt which contains extra webbing clips. His parents, Richard and Mary Parker, died in a plane crash when Peter was very young. Ever since, he's had to live with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May. You find out much later that the plane crash wasn't an accident. Mary and Ben were agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and they were assassinated. The plane was destroyed by Captain America's nemesis, the Red Skull. In Greek myth, the goddess Athena became jealous that a mortal woman called Arachne was a better weaver than all the gods. When Arachne became arrogant of her talent, she was transformed into a hated creature that could do nothing but weave, a spider. This story emphasizes that self-confidence can be self-destructive. The moral of the story was carried over to the very first issue of Spider-Man. When he obtained his powers, Spider-Man became a wrestler to make some money. Spider-Man became cocky when he obtained his spider powers and did not stop a burglar from getting away because he didn't want to get involved. He learned later that that same burglar killed his Uncle Ben. Spider-Man is known as Webhead, Wallcrawler, Web-Slinger, and Spidey. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was a cartoon that ran from 1981 to 1986. It follows the adventures of Spider-Man, the X-Men, and Firestar. Some fans speculate that Spider-Man is Jewish, since he uses Jewish phrases from time to time. Spider-Man's outfit was originally just a suit. In modern comics, it is made of microscopic robots called nanobots. His fursuit was red and blackish blue. It had webs under the armpits. This was incorporated in the movie Spider-Man Homecoming. Stan Lee came up with the idea of Spider-Man after observing a fly sticking to walls. Marvel did a Spider-Man comic that paid tribute to the 9/11 disaster. Many readers saw it as a cheap tactic to boost sales. The comic didn't even make sense. There's a panel where Juggernaut is seen cleaning up the rubble of the Twin Towers, but he knocked down one of the towers himself in a previous issue, and he laughed about it. A lot. In Spider-Man's first title comic, Amazing Spider-Man number 1, he tried to join the Fantastic Four. The first villain he faced was the Chameleon. Spider-Man met a man called the Tailor who makes costumes for superheroes and villains. He's made outfits for Thor, Thing, Captain America, Doctor Doom, Blob, and many others. The Tailor said he would make a better costume for Spider-Man because his spider suit kind of sucked. There's a Spider-Man in an alternative timeline where Peter Parker was raised in the 1930s during the Great Depression. He becomes a vigilante and battles with organized crime in New York City. He wears a trench coat, a fedora, and a black and white spider suit. This version, which is called Spider-Man Noir, is voiced by Nicolas Cage in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
I like to drink egg creams, and I like to fight Nazis. A lot. Sometimes I let matches burn down to my fingertips just to feel something, anything.
Peter Parker has a healing factor. Although it's not as strong as Wolverine's, he can heal from a broken bone in a few days. People forget just how absurdly strong Spider-Man is. Spider-Man can lift 40,000 pounds. That's 20 tons. That is the weight of a fully loaded school bus. Spider-Man almost never uses his full strength. He is so strong, he could punch a person's jaw off their face. The front cover of Amazing Spider-Man 573 shows talk show host Stephen Colbert rescuing Spider-Man. The spider that gave him his power was an irradiated Acarenia tepidorium. It is better known as the common house spider. Spider-Man's web fluid is over 2.5 times stronger than steel. Spider-Man has teamed up with the Transformers. He is immune to most forms of toxin. Even if he was poisoned, he recovers incredibly quickly. He got bit by a vampire once, but just walked it off. That actually happened. Spider-Man can seal a bullet wound with his webbing. He can use his web shooters to form a parachute. An alternate comic shows what Peter would have been like if he never became a superhero. Spider-Man has sold over 3,000 solo appearances in comics, which is more than any other Marvel hero. Stan Lee was going to make Spider-Man his final creation before quitting Marvel. Spider-Man teamed up with the original Saturday Night Live cast, Bill Murray, John Belushi, and Dan Aykroyd to fight a samurai. Because, hey, why not? Spider-Man was a teacher at the X-Men Mansion. He taught superpower ethics to teenage mutants. He prefers to be called Mr. Spider-Man by his students. Itsy Bitsy is a supervillainess who has the DNA of Spider-Man and Deadpool. She has the agility sticking abilities of Spider-Man and the healing factor of Deadpool. She also has 8 razor-sharp limbs. In an alternative universe, Spider-Man is an Indian called Pavatar Prabhakar. Spider-Man fought Powdered Toast Man. It was a pretty one-sided fight. There's a pig parody version of Peter Parker called Peter Porker. His superhero name is Spider-Ham. Peter Porker was born as a spider called Peter. He bit his Aunt May while she was using an atomic-powered hairdryer which transformed him into Spider-Ham. If you think that's made up, that is the actual explanation given on Wikipedia. Spider-Man once fought Typeface, a villain who fights people with the letters of the alphabet. We should see him in a Spider-Man movie any day now. Spider-Man has fought many robots called Spider Slayers throughout the years. They were built by Kingpin's head scientist, Smythe. His first love was not Mary Jane Watson or Gwen Stacy. It was a secretary at the Daily Bugle called Betty Brant. Also, a lot of people don't realize that she was played by Elizabeth Banks in the original Spider-Man trilogy. Yeah, that Elizabeth Banks. Weird. He briefly had organic web shooters like the original Spider-Man movie trilogy. Spider-Man is the most profitable superhero in terms of merchandise. Over $1 billion is spent on Spider-Man merchandise every year. He has FaceTime on the wrist of his spider suit. Probably the weirdest supervillain Spider-Man has ever fought was Chicken Cow. He was a giant monster with the upper body of a chicken and the lower body of a cow. Stan Lee decided to create a spider-themed superhero after reading about Richard Wentworth in the pulp magazine The Spider. The Spider is his nickname. In these stories, Spider was a millionaire playboy who disguised himself while he battled thugs and gangsters. When Spider-Man wants to track someone, he plants a spider tracer on them. Each one of these tracers costs over $2,000. There have been at least 8 animated Spider-Man shows. He's a big fan of the video game Overwatch. Some comics have multiple covers to make more money, and that's the only reason they have more covers. Amazing Spider-Man number 666 has a staggering 145 different covers, which is the world record. He's appeared in at least 39 video games on 32 platforms, which is more than any other superhero. His web slingers are pressure sensitive. He designed them so they only fire web when he taps them twice with his middle and ring finger. He designed them this way so they can't go off accidentally when he's punching somebody. A comic series called What If debuted in 1977. In each issue, it asks a hypothetical what if scenario. The very first issue asked, what if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four, which is a reference to the first issue where he tried to join the team. Miguel O'Hara is a Spider-Man from the future. He is more often known as Spider-Man 2099. Oscar Isaac provides the voice of Spider-Man 2099 in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. In 2013, a prototype suit was created that was fitted with mini microphones that make the suit tingle if it picked up on any sound. This suit was designed to help the wearer evade unseen threats. Most new technology has boring names like LE3244, but this tech has the best name possible, the Spider Sense. It is named after Spider-Man's ability to preemptively detect danger. One of Stan Lee's favorite quotes from the comics is when Spider-Man said, "If unpopularity ever became popular, I'd be top man around here." An all-singing, all-dancing musical of Spider-Man was considered during the 1970s. This idea was canned when Marvel producers realized that it'd be stupid to turn Spider-Man into a musical. Which reminds me, Spider-Man Turn Out the Dark officially opened on Broadway on June 14th, 2011. It had the following villains: Green Goblin, Arachne, Carnage, Swarm, Electro, Lizard, who is a man with a lizard growing out of his chest, Kraven the Hunter, and a living Swiss Army knife called Swiss Miss. Swiss Miss is not from the comics and was concocted for the show. The Spider-Man musical got such bad reviews that comedian Joan Rivers went to see it so she had more material for her stand-up comedy. The musical was so expensive, it needed to sell out every day for a decade just to break even. The Broadway musical was cancelled on January 4th, 2014. Despite the musical's failure, it had the world record for pulling in the most money in a single week, $2.9 million over 9 performances. The previews of the show started in November 2010. Countless technical difficulties and injuries led to shows being delayed more and more. As a result, it had more previews than any Broadway show ever, 182. One of the reasons the musical didn't do well is because the director, Julie Taymor, focused too much on the Greek myth of Arachne. Taymor also made Arachne the same spider that gave Peter Parker his powers, and most of Act 2 revolves around Arachne trying to mate with Spider-Man. Also, she sings about the woes of trying on shoes. Viewers didn't like this because why would they? They wanted to see Spider-Man swing on webs and punch supervillains. The director was fired, the Arachne scenes were removed, and the script was heavily revised. It is the most expensive Broadway show ever, costing $65 million. A man legally changed his name to Spider-Man because he thought it'd be funny. It wasn't at all. In fact, it ruined his life. He finds it impossible to get a job or find a date. He is searched and interrogated almost every time he flies. He can't book a table or rent a car because employees assume he's playing a prank. Online registrations are cancelled within minutes. Despite these inconveniences, he refuses to change his name back. Spider-Man was not the first spider-themed character that Marvel created. A month before Spider-Man's debut, there was a story about a spider that grew enormous and gained vast intelligence. It was killed by the end of the issue. However, this concept was used in later Spider-Man comics when Spider-Man mutated into a monstrous man-spider. There is an alternative comic that shows what would have happened if Spider-Man kept his 6 arms. After being hit by an isotope genome accelerator, you know, one of them, his body was split into 2, Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Peter Parker had the intelligence, moral, and responsibility, but none of the powers. Spider-Man had all the powers, but absolutely no responsibility because he had no memory of Uncle Ben. This version of Spider-Man only cared about money and fame, which is exactly what he was like before his uncle was killed. It was very difficult to convince this Spider-Man to rebond with Peter Parker. Spider-Man briefly had an app called Uber Hero. He acted like an Uber driver by grabbing clients and swinging them around the city. Although it's well known that Peter Parker was bullied a lot in high school, you may not know that he briefly became a bully himself. When he obtained his spider powers, his new strength and agility made him an excellent sportsman, and he befriended the jocks in school. When they started picking on another kid called Charlie Wiederman, Peter joined in because he didn't want to lose his popularity. Years later, Wiederman became a murderer and destroyed Peter Parker's house. Peter believes things would have turned out differently if he was nicer to Wiederman. After his house was destroyed, Peter, Aunt May, and Mary Jane moved in with the Avengers. Peter Parker is usually late for everything due to his life as Spider-Man. Because of this, his partner, Mary Jane, always factors in Parker time. So when she tells Peter to meet him at 8 o'clock, Mary Jane actually means 9, knowing that he'd be delayed due to fighting Sandman or Dr. Octopus or the Lizard. If he taps his web shooters for a split second, he can shoot his web as a projectile weapon called a web ball. In case you never noticed, Spider-Man's name is always written with a hyphen. Stan Lee did this because he was worried that if the name was written without a hyphen, the character could get mixed up with Superman. Although that sounds ridiculous, Dr. Octopus called Spider-Man Superman in his debut comic. One of his weapons is a web bomb. After it activates, it shoots webs in every direction. Spider-Man has beaten the Hulk in a fight. Granted, the Hulk was heavily weakened, and Spider-Man had the power of the Silver Surfer, but it still counts. Or maybe it doesn't, I don't know. In an alternative universe, Peter Parker became a murderous vigilante after Uncle Ben was killed. He dons a black spider suit and hunts down criminals, much like the Punisher. In one story, thousands of inhabitants from New York gain Spider-Man powers. Although Spider-Man's supposed to never take a life, the writers forget about this sometimes. When an assassin called the Finisher fired missiles at Spider-Man, he deflected them back at the supervillain, killing him. He also drowned a being called Gog in quicksand. Also, the issue had a T-Rex for some reason. Spider-Man killed a supervillain called Whisper by using him as a human shield against another baddie called Pulse. Pulse stabs Whisper to death, and Spider-Man tosses him aside, unfazed. What a guy. He also killed Backwards Man and Moondark. Wow, Spider-Man's killed loads of people. How can people go berserk when Batman or Superman kill somebody but nobody makes a peek about Spidey's murder streak? Throughout the years, a woman called Vanna Smith kept being saved by Spider-Man from supervillains like Rhino, Vulture, Sandman, and the Meteor. Spider-Man never intended to save her, she just happened to be around when Spider-Man was battling a foe. Although Spider-Man kept saving the same woman over the years by coincidence, she was convinced that he was stalking her. As a result, she got a restraining order, so he wasn't allowed to be within 500 feet of her. In 2013, IGN's top 100 comic book heroes of all time ranked Spider-Man at number 3. There's a comic that showed how different Spider-Man's life would have been if his Aunt May died instead of Uncle Ben. Spider-Man encountered a tall, geeky, spectacled journalist called Ethan Edwards. Ethan turned out to be a superhero who called himself Moral Man. He had super strength and could fly. He pointed out to Spider-Man that he didn't need to wear a mask because no one would recognize him if he wore glasses in his civilian identity. The newspapers deduced that Ethan was a superhero immediately. This story was a clear jab at the absurdity of Superman's secret identity. Spider-Man has a light built into his utility belt so he can see in total darkness. Stan Lee wanted Spider-Man's costume to be inside a ring that activated when pressed. This idea was used for the superhero, The Flash. Most of Spider-Man's villains are animal-based: Rhino, Chameleon, Dr. Octopus, Scorpion, Lizard, Vulture, and so on. The 2018 game, Spider-Man, is considered to be the greatest Spider-Man game ever. It was so successful, it inspired a comic series. His webbing lasts for an hour. There's a Spider-Man from another universe made of thousands of spiders. There's also a Spider-Man from the Wild West called Webslinger. His mask has filters which make Spider-Man immune to gas attacks. He became a science teacher at the same school he used to attend. He hates Star Wars. Some of Spider-Man's dumbest villains include Jack-O-Lantern, Beetle, Big Wheel, Gibbon, Grizzly, Human Fly, Sticks and Stone, the Living Brain, and, of course, the Ringer. You know what the Ringer does? He shoots rings. That's it. Most of these villains teamed up against Spider-Man in a story called The Legion of Losers. There's an alternative story that shows what Spider-Man would have been like if Uncle Ben never died. In this story, Spider-Man becomes so popular, he became the PR agent of the Avengers, the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four. Peter Parker became so rich, he bought Marvel. Spider-Man once battled an alien called the Prodigy. The Prodigy's evil plan was to pose as a teacher and give out misinformation about sex. This would cause an abundance of teen pregnancies, which would allow the Prodigy to kidnap the babies to use for his evil schemes. There has to be an easier way to do that. Iron Man built an armored suit for Spider-Man called the Iron Spider. It has bulletproof armor, which allows him to glide. It has 6 arms integrated into it, which can be activated through thought. These arms are called the Waldos. I don't know why. What's a Waldo? Do you mean this? Waldo? Who's called Wally in Europe? Why did they change the name to Wally? What am I talking about? Oh yeah, Spider-Man. In 1997, Marvel released an alternative story where Peter Parker gets bitten by a radioactive sheep and becomes Sheepman. Patrick Priebe has invented a real-life web shooter that fires pellets and a fishing line with a small harpoon instead of liquid web. The shooter is a coil gun which is fueled by a single lithium polymer battery. You can watch him use it on tin cans on his YouTube channel, LaserGadgets. Check it out. In an alternative universe, there's a super rich Peter Parker called Armored Spider-Man. With his billions of dollars, he invented dozens of gadgets which has been incorporated into his spider suit. Although most Peter Parkers from alternative universes are modest and caring due to suffering tragedy from an early age, Armored Spider-Man has little to no hardships in life, which has turned him into an arrogant jerk. Spider-Man fought a villain called Swarm, a bank robber made of mutant bees that absorbed the consciousness of an ex-Nazi scientist. You heard that right. Nazi bees. When the government set up the Superhuman Registration Act, superheroes had to unveil their identities or they would be considered criminals. Spider-Man did the unthinkable and unmasked himself on live television. When Spider-Man unmasked himself to the world, the first thing he said was, "My name is Peter Parker and I've been Spider-Man since I was 15. Any questions?" Yes. There was many questions. After Peter revealed his identity, the internet crashed because 30 million users typed in the name Peter Parker in the search engine at the same time. When he revealed his identity, his old schoolmate, Deb Whitman, wrote a biography of how she knew Peter. However, the publisher twisted the story to sell more copies. The publisher titled the book Two-Faced, How Peter Parker Ruined My Life. The story he debuted in included other tales including The Bell Ringer, Man in the Mummy Case, and There Are Martians Among Us. This comic is now worth at least $30,000. His first self-titled comic, Amazing Spider-Man #1, is worth $16,000. Although every diehard Spider-Man fan knows this is what the first issue of Spider-Man's debut looked like, many people don't know that it was supposed to look like this. He is the most agile person in the world apart from Nightcrawler and Deadpool. And for the final fact, there was a live-action TV show of Spider-Man in Japan in the 1970s. Spider-Man wasn't a nerdy teenager called Peter Parker who obtained his powers from a radioactive spider. Instead, he was a daredevil motorcyclist called Takuya Yamashiro, who was given spider powers from Guerrera, an alien from the planet Spider, which was destroyed by Professor Monster. Spider-Man drives the Marveler ship, which transforms into a colossal robot called the Leopardon. And yes, the robot is a big leopard, and no, I don't know why a superhero called Spider-Man drives a leopard's robot. The funny thing is, this character has actually been incorporated into the comics. The weirdest thing with the show, which is saying a lot, the giant robot Leopardon in the show is a direct inspiration for the TV show Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe. If you're a die-hard Spider-Man fan, you might be thinking, wait, hold on, you barely didn't even talk about J. Jonah Jameson, his boss, or barely mentioned Aunt May, barely mentioned his lovers Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy. What with the infamous Clone Saga with the Jackal, or when he made a deal with the devil? What about Spider-Gwen or Miles Morales? But that's the thing, guys, I didn't mention any of that stuff, and this video is still over 20 minutes long and did 100 facts. The thing is, they deserve their own list. It'd be an injustice if I just shoved it into this video. So if you want me to do a video about any other elements of Spider-Man, not just the supervillains, but J. Jonah Jameson, Aunt May, Gwen Stacy, Uncle Ben, and so on, let me know and I'll upload it as soon as possible.